Just as a reminder, you can visit us at thepandapod.com. That's thepandapod.com to grab our RSS feed, listen directly, and share PandaPod with your family and friends. You can also reach us directly via email through podcast@thepandapod.com. Thanks for listening.
Wouldn't it be amazing if there was like a summer camp except for adults?
How whimsical are we talking?
Oh, all of the whimsy.
You're looking for Hot Alien Summer Camp 2024. It's their third annual event at Starstruck Farms in Lebanon, Tennessee. You just come with an open heart to embrace a magical weekend. There's live entertainment, energy healing, art, and all kinds of workshops.
And I heard Karen Rontowski and Ryan Singer are returning once again to grace the stage with some cosmic comedy. Also, look forward to live music and the Makers Market, where you'll find handmade, consciously created art to pique all of your whimsical curiosities.
Visit the website at hotaliensummercamp.com, where pre-sale tickets are live now. There's lots to discover on the website, including past events, an email newsletter, and a lively Discord community.
And don't forget to check out the Alien Auction, where goodies and readings will be up for bidding. The auction starts March 24th and culminates with an all-day live stream event on March 31st. So I'll be seeing you August 8th through 11th at Hot Alien Summer Camp. Namaste!
Stay tuned after the episode for more information. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Panda Pod, Plots Expanded. I am Rab, and I'm joined, as usual, with Jeff.
Oh,
and Wiggy.
what up, peeps?
And today we're going to be continuing our World War II series, or at least ostensibly World War II series. And we're going to be talking about more World War I, because you really can't understand without World War I.
Hell yeah. The OG war.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great war. It wasn't that great, I guess, but I mean, it was at the time that seemed like it was going to be the big one. So
It was great killing people. I mean, millions of people died. So, I mean, that's where like gas bombs and shit came from. So it was pretty great if you were into that, I guess.
yes, if you were into a lot of people dying, then yes, that was great.
If you were into population control, then you loved it.
I think World War II did it better.
Just saying. In war rankings, might be on top. I don't know, but yeah. So I think today I'm going to start by taking you guys through. So the idea of this one, last time when we talked about World War I, it was a little while ago, and we covered mostly the Germany and Russia, because they had a very related history in World War I. And so since we've already covered Germany, we're probably not going to talk about them too much more. What I mostly want to talk about is France, the UK, and the United States.
Okay.
And since, obviously there's plenty of podcasts you can go listen to about they break down all the battles in World War I and stuff. Like, go listen to a World War I podcast if you care about that. But mostly I want to talk about what was going on in those countries before the war, what were the causes, and what can we learn about today, and also World War II from what was going on before, during, and after World War I in those three countries.
Interested to see what we're going to teach Jeff today.
Yeah, I gunned to my head. I could not tell you why the U.S. joined World War I. Could not do it.
Interesting one, and maybe we'll get into that. I think that's a good idea. We should table that and get into it, because there is an answer that if you just quiz somebody who only knew high school textbooks, they would give, but that isn't actually really the correct answer at all. So probably worth talking about that when we get to U.S. I don't think I covered that, but I think I know enough about it to have an intelligent conversation.
Excellent. Expand my thoughts. Let's do this.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with France, though. And France, I have a kind of a timeline of events to kind of get some context to get us talking. And so I'll go through the timeline, and I guess as you guys, if you hear anything interesting you want to spend some time on, just stop me. So, in 1870, France, the Second Empire, collapses. And this is during the Franco-Prussian War. So at this time, Germany did not exist. There were German people, and the largest German state, or at least the most powerful one, was called Prussia. And France was fighting Prussia. It got its ass kind of kicked to some degree in 1870, and that caused the Second French Empire to collapse. And they declared the Third Republic.
France just cannot fight Germany. Like, they just don't do well against the German people. Like, they just can't. I mean, their border is too wide for them, for the amount of people that they can put towards a fight.
Yeah, or something. I really don't know. I mean, Napoleon really did hand Germany, that was the last time I would say that France really, like, absolutely rocked Germany. Before that,
only time.
Yeah, so in 1870, the Third Republic begins, and that's actually the government that was still in charge at the point when World War II started when World War I started in 1914. Maybe in World War II too. I didn't do research all the way up to World War II for obvious reasons, but I would imagine it is. I can't think of why it would be different. And so the Third Republic starts, and then also another notable thing is that in 1871, when the Franco-Prussian War was wrapping up, Germany took the territory of Alsace-Lorraine, which is one of the causes of World War I, actually, is the fact that Germany had that territory. It is right on the border of France and Germany, in the middle. So, like, it's not touching any ocean. And it is, like, a region where, as you can imagine, many people speak German and many people speak French. Because, I mean, at the time when Germany and France were like a long, long time ago, there wasn't the Germany, there wasn't the French, there was the French, there was just, those languages and those people. And France formed a lot faster. But I mean, it was never the case that, like, this Alsace-Lorraine territory became, decidedly one or the other, right? So anyways, one of the things that came out of the Franco-Prussian War was that Germany got that territory. Another thing that came out of the Franco-Prussian War is that while France was still in the Third Republic period, like after the empire collapsed, but before they wrapped up the war, there was, for a brief period of time, the Paris Commune. Do you guys know about this?
I do not.
So the Paris Commune was a kind of like famous or infamous government that lasted for less than a year. And it was basically Paris, like almost like reliving the glory days of the French Revolution. And they declared themselves the Paris Commune. They said that they weren't under the authority of France. And then at some point, the armies came home, basically. France sent its armies home from from the Franco-Prussian War, and also what was left of them, and also, like, Prussia literally sent its army to Paris to crush this thing. But one thing that's notable about the Paris Commune, like in the history of like global socialism, is that the Paris Commune is what like Marx and them were alive for. So, like, they never saw, the USSR. They were dead by that point. But they did see the Paris Commune. They got to see, like, they based a lot of socialist thought on what happened in the Paris Commune.
Yeah, they were supposed to be the like they were supposed to be the flame that ignited socialism as far as like they were concerned, right? Like France was supposed to be the big thing that just ignited communism, and that was supposed to be what was like the shining star. But they had to, like, that failed, and then the only other option that they had was Russia. And I think we've already talked about that part. So
Right. Well, I mean, actually, a lot of people thought it was going to be in Germany, but yeah, I mean, when the Paris Commune was happening, people were really excited for it. It was almost like that thing. You guys remember when during 2020 there was like a part of Seattle that went independent for a little while?
Yeah, that was wild.
It's kind of like that, I would say. I mean, I think that lasted for even less time than the Paris Commune did, but like for a moment, it was like socialists from all over the world were like coming there and like if they could to kind of try to like help out. I mean, and back then they didn't have plane travel, and so it was a just really an interesting experiment, and definitely informed a lot of what like communists and socialists thought going forward, especially because like I mean the main reason that they failed is because they were crushed. And the main reason they were crushed is because they had very, very little participation in an army. Because it turns out that if you let people do what they want, they don't actually want to fight.
yeah, that's what we fight against here. We tell you we'll let you go to college and not go $30,000 or $30,000 to $120,000 in debt just to go to college. We'll pay for it if you're in the army. You've got to have an incentive.
Right, exactly. Somebody's got to twist your arm to get you to fight. And I mean, whether there's enough people in Paris for them to raise an army that could have fought the Prussian army, I mean, that's debatable. Probably not. But, it's still one big problem they had was that there was no military backing up, really. It was just the fact that there was kind of like almost a passive resistance happening there.
It's true out in Seattle as well, yeah. Was it Seattle?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the government just let it happen. They didn't even try
Until
to
they
stop it.
didn't anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, until they didn't, and then we're like, okay, this is done.
Well, there is something to be said for, like, a government is not really going to want to violently put down something that isn't a direct threat. Like, because if they're going to have to go in and kill, 40,000 people to put down the Paris Commune, like, they may not want to do that. Like, I think that's kind of the theory on that level of organizing, is that you kind of like, you like really the government doesn't want to have that blood on its hands to some degree. But then, like you said, until it decides, oh, well, this is worth it. So about the Third Republic period, it also saw a huge growth in French colonial territories in Africa and Asia. France was treating Algeria and Northern Africa like it was basically like another just province of France. They had tons of settlers that would go there. And the reason that's important is just because, another reason that World War I was fought is because Germany was kind of like almost jealous that it didn't get to be a colonial power. I think we talked about that in the past.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that.
So 1902, the Socialist Party becomes the largest party in France's ruling coalition. And in 1914, France enters World War I based on their treaty with Russia. So World War I, like the actual first person to join, or first country to join, I think was Russia. It was Austria-Hungary had attacked Serbia, I believe. And Russia had a treaty with Serbia, and France had a treaty with Russia. And, the UK eventually came in because they had a treaty with France. So that's my brief timeline of France.
Okay. Sounds very French.
Eventually, I'm going to get into. I have like two more timelines to do with the UK and the US, and then I have a during the war and after the war section. So, I think we're making good time here and probably jump straight into the UK if you guys don't have anything else to talk about.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So in the UK, I have this noted that Queen Victoria ruled from 1837 to 1901, which is just absolutely insane. But also that's to kind of give you some like context of the continuity, right? Like, I mean, she couldn't have lived to World War One, probably. I mean, maybe she could have, but it's like, but I mean, going back to 1837, there's a monarch who got almost all the way there. Wow.
It's inbreeding supposed to like destroy your lifespan.
Not for British queens for some reason. I don't know why.
British queens just live forever. What's the?
Especially if they like take power young, then they just end up living a really, really, really long time. I don't know why that is. I mean, really, we're just talking about two of them, I think. Queen Victoria and the most recent Queen Elizabeth.
I guess if you throw in all the ones that were just silently killed or beheaded for no reason whatsoever, I guess it's probably under average.
Right.
We get that.
And I think if you're a monarch and you end up like taking power fairly young and you rule for 20 years, like at that point, it's pretty unlikely there's going to be like a violent overthrow at least. So that helps your statistics some. So as long as you can live, you're probably going to be king or queen.
And if you got all that money, you could definitely get all the like adrenaline or whatever that you need to survive that long,
Right.
Especially if you're the monarch of the UK, because you got to have really close ties to the Illuminati there.
Sure.
Yeah, they're making them drink that Illuminade.
So in 1890, around 1890, that's when the British Labour Party started to form. And in 1903, after Victoria's gone, they enter a pact with the Liberal Party. Like a power sharing agreement, kind of. And in 1906, the Liberal Party manages to become the ruling party with the help of the Socialists, the Labour Party, I guess. The reason I keep bringing that up is just the fact that one of the things I think that's true about World War One is that it is like almost a reaction to the fact that socialist parties were taking power in many governments in Europe.
It is interesting that it seems to be hop skipping around. Like everybody, I mean, it is an idealism, right? Like it's the idealistic way to go if it works, right? So maybe everybody's just like, let's just give it a little taste. Let's have a little Kit Kat bar of.
Yeah, they were. There was a lot of. I mean, the period before 1900, that was industrial. We're only talking about like 150 to 100 years, right, of industrialism. And that was absolutely brutal for the people who had to live through it as workers, right? So, I mean, it makes sense that in the developed countries like, France and England and Germany, that you would get socialist parties of people who are basically doing socialism in the sense that they're trying to like make labor unions and do stuff to protect workers who have been living through some extremely horrific conditions.
I mean, I know I dip my toe in socialism. I'd do it.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you had lost your toe due to a machine falling, like unsafe labor conditions and what have you. I feel like at that point, you would go in with all your toes. Your hands at least.
Yeah, for sure.
So 1899 is the Second Boer War, which is spelled Boer. And Boer is a word in Dutch that means farmer. And what the Second Boer War is that semi-abandoned Dutch colonies in South Africa were kind of like resisting the British taking over. So the Dutch didn't really they kind of maybe like nominally controlled the territory, but like their hold of it was very weak, and it was mostly local resistance, and also the Dutch working on making getting natives on their side too, to some degree, because I mean they could talk up how bad it was to be under British rule, although I mean it was also quite awful to be under Dutch rule. One of the reasons this war is so notable is because like Britain didn't expect it to be as tough as it was. They ended up sending 400,000 troops to this war. So
That's a lot.
Yeah, and that's what gained them South Africa in the long run. And they so I mean like it's notable in the context of World War One because like this is in some ways like a preview of the fact that they can mobilize that many people.
Yeah,
Do we know how many like they sent to World War II? Just for like,
how many did British people send to World War II? They had a peak of 4 million soldiers in 1918. That's a World War One, and 2.9 million in 1945. So I guess they had less in World War II than World War One, actually.
well, they lost a lot in World War One, right?
So what I'm showing is the British Empire in dominions. So if you count their other territories,
Sure.
raised almost 8.6 million men for military service during World War II.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was over 5 million coming from the British Isles.
Right. A lot of times they'll count like Australia as separate, right? Because they're separate today. But I mean, at that time, things were a little more tricky.
Yeah.
So I also have, speaking of Australia, my next item in here is that in 1901, 6 colonies in Australia unite to form the Commonwealth of Australia, which is still under the British government. I don't know why I thought that was particularly notable. I guess maybe just because like Australia at this point is only a little over 100 years old, you know. So that's interesting, I guess.
That's when they created their constitution.
Yeah. And they decided, and still to this day, to be part of the Commonwealth, and therefore the English monarch is still their monarch, right? Isn't that true still today?
I have no idea. I was actually going to ask you that.
The Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act was on the 9th of July, 1900.
Well, that wasn't the question asked at all.
Hang on.
What'd you ask? I was Googling.
Is Australia still a founder of or still part of the Commonwealth? I think so. It looks like, the British Commonwealth still includes Australia and South Africa.
Interesting.
And India, apparently. That's kind of wild.
Wait, what? India is still part of the Commonwealth?
At least Wikipedia's map shows that, which is very strange. That doesn't make any sense. That really seems like something that wouldn't be true.
Yes, it is. India is the largest member state.
That's pretty wild.
Well, you know, a thing as an aside, okay, as much as they kind of kicked the British out, right? But something to know is that socially, for a really long time, up until probably pretty current times, they kind of like India kind of thought that England was the shit, and they could do no wrong. Like they looked up to them. They wanted to be like them as far as like commerce and how governments ruled, and like a lot of their things they took from England. I mean, just cricket alone, right? The sports,
right?
They kind of idolized them a bit, and I mean, 15 years ago, I still kind of heard a little bit of that. Not so much lately, but, definitely not that long ago. That was still kind of a thing.
And speaking of things that didn't happen that long ago, in 1975, like the Queen of England played a major role in like basically a coup that happened in Australia.
Really?
Yeah, they had a constitutional crisis, and essentially, I mean, this could be a whole episode on itself, but essentially the way I understand it is that the U.S. didn't like their government, and so they got the Queen to like be as much of a pain as possible to the Australians, to the point where she got to dismiss their prime minister.
I want to have that much power.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's wild that that's the case. I mean, and it's also wild the fact that they didn't decide right after that to just be like, okay, you don't get to do anything here anymore.
Yeah, that's wild.
So back to our main story. After this diversion down under, in 1906, and continuing up until World War I started, there were a lot of welfare reforms in Britain, and those include free school lunches for children, banning child begging, and also selling minors tobacco, care for the elderly, crackdown on like labor violations and stuff. And one of the reasons that this was ostensibly done is actually because of the Boer War and how much trouble they had raising troops, like healthy troops during it. Like, that's the reason that they decided to do like free school lunches for children, for instance, so that way they could be guaranteed that the workers had at least good nutrition, and so they could be raised as troops later on. So,
yeah, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, ultimately, you do have socialists who are sort of in power and sort of driving this stuff to get people school lunches, but I mean, whether the fact that it's going to be used for a dark aim is something that was unknown to them at the time, in a way. I mean, sort of. I mean, I guess sort of, right? I mean, the liberals are the ones in control, so they're probably saying the stuff out loud, like, we had so much trouble getting troops before, let's give people food. But also, I mean, there were a lot of people who were fighting, too, for their own rights, and these are actually major victories for them. So it's both dark and light, I would say.
Yeah, sometimes dark intentions can have good outcomes. But, like, I see that more and more in history, and it's true of the other way as well. Like, you have really good intentions and still do something really bad.
Right. Okay, so I'm done with the UK, and I'm going to jump over to the US. So we'll take the Titanic across the Atlantic Ocean, and hopefully we'll arrive safely here. Oh, no.
Not with that analogy.
So in 1890, and this one's notable, I think we talked about it on one of the World War I episodes. 1890 sees the Spanish-American War, which is the first time that the U.S. like intentionally picked a fight with a European power and then won. I guess apart from the American Revolution. I mean, they didn't really intentionally pick that fight to some degree. But this is the first time that like the U.S. decided, okay, we're going to invade and like take something from a European power. Specifically, what they really wanted was Cuba. And they kind of, there's some debate about, well, I mean, it's kind of like a solved thing at this point. I think that if effectively there was a false flag that where the U.S. kind of like blew up one of its own ships. I don't know if that's ever been like conclusively proven, but it's really theorized that was the case. And
to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. They blamed Spain, and they invaded Cuba to kind of kick the Spaniards out to help Cuba kind of become independent. And ultimately, what becoming independent meant, at least to the U.S. government, is that Cuba was going to be under U.S. control, in the sense of, at the very least, that the U.S. was going to like dominate them from a trade perspective, from an economy perspective, and what have you, right? Just like they had done to other Latin American countries.
Yeah, we're pretty predictable.
Yep. And of course, Cuba comes back later, but that's probably not even really part of World War One or World War Two. So that would be it would be fun to do a series on Cuba though, because I think it's pretty interesting, especially like Bay of Pigs and what have you. But
Cover that.
that would be something we talk about another time. Also, notable that after the Spanish-American War, the U.S. became like an international like empire in a way, because they took over the Philippines, which are in Asia. Spain owned them, and they're actually called the Philippines after a King Philip, which they had a lot of. And so the U.S. was a lot more brutal to the Philippines than they were Cuba. They treated Cuba as kind of like, I mean, they treated it as an independent state that they just wanted to dominate. They treated Philippines as a straight colony. And I think that probably all in all, they might have been less brutal than the Spaniards were, but that's not a very high bar to cross, right?
I didn't know that. I didn't know we owned some Asia.
Yeah, well, right now we don't own the Philippines. They're an independent country, but
For sure.
at that time, the U.S. did directly administer the Philippines. I don't know when that ended. That'd be an interesting thing to look up. So 1890 also sees the start of what's called the Progressive Era in the United States. This was a lot different than the U.S. Than the Europe, because there was never really a socialist party in the United States, at least not one that took power. At least during this time, right? Well, there was never one that took power, but like there wasn't really a big one during this time either. What people were mostly interested in was fighting big monopolies and corruption in government. So, like, Teddy Roosevelt is one of the big people from the Progressive Era, and Taft as well. They kind of like, to some degree, succeeded at taking on these giant conglomerates like the Rockefellers and Carnegie and stuff like that. It's something that you learn about in high school history usually.
Oh, yeah.
Some notable stuff, though. 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which forced a lot of forced some monopolies to break up. In 1906, the FDA was formed, and women's suffrage was kind of happening around that time too. Although it didn't pass until after World War One, I believe. And what really kind of kicked into high gear was all the soldiers leaving for World War One, and therefore the women having to take jobs that normally would be done by men. So that's all I have on before the war section. Any questions about any of those?
No, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's good. I keep thinking of things, but they're further on in the timeline. So
Exactly.
I save those for when we get there.
Yeah, sounds good. So I have now a section during the war, kind of like a brief timeline as well. Like I said, it doesn't really make sense to get into like battles and stuff usually. That's just too complicated. Requires too much research, and also like we would have to do like 7 episodes or more on it. You know, I mean, there's a fucking podcast you can listen to that does like literally day by day. Each episode is 1 day of the war.
That's bananas. That's so much work.
Yeah, I think they're on YouTube, and I think that it's they also have like a lot of graphics and stuff. So I mean, it was never really like a podcast, I suppose, but still, it's kind of wild how much detail there is.
History Channel overloaded.
I mean, I guess there's ultimately as much detail about our current period and all the periods before it as there were in World War One. But I think the thing about World War One is people had like crazy good records of like troop movements and stuff. So like if you really want to, you can drill into a lot of that detail. Whereas like older wars and stuff are a little harder to do that with.
Yeah. I mean, most people just don't even know that they happened. So,
Yeah. So, 1914 to 1917, was at least on the we already talked about the Germany's Eastern Front with Russia, and so this is Germany's Western Front with France and the UK. And so on that side, 1914 and 1917 saw a lot of trench warfare with nearly no gains. So like they drew up their lines, they dug their trenches, they got their machine guns set up, and nobody wanted to go attack machine gun nests because that was a surefire way to get killed. So by 1917, the French soldiers had actually pretty much like come to an informal agreement that they just would they even if they got any orders to attack, that they would ignore them, and they would only try to defend themselves and their positions. And at the start of the war, most British troops were defending colonies. And by 1917, following a lot of French losses, the British troops made up 2/3 of the army on the Western Front. And then around that time, the U.S. gets involved. So we could spend some time talking about that. The reason that's given in high school history books as to why the U.S. got involved in World War I, one of the main reasons is that German U-boats sunk the Lusitania ship. The issue with that is that it happened like in 1915, I think. And the U.S. didn't get involved until 1917. So, despite the fact that that is what's told in the history textbooks, it's probably not really true. Because the guy who was president at the start of World War I can't remember.
don't know.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson. That's right, of course. He ran for re-election he said that he was going to, one of the major parts of his platform was that he was going to ignore the fact that the Germans had sunk that ship and continue to not get involved. And it happened. So it happened before he was elected. But he decided eventually to change his mind on that and get in.
Surprised. I'm so surprised a president would do that. That's just nonsense.
Obviously, it's not entirely their decision, and like the pressures that are on them during elections are different than the pressures that are on them once they're in office. But I mean, still, you have a point. They're creatures that are known to go back on their word. So another reason that the U.S. Supposedly got involved is the Zimmerman telegram. Do you know about that, Jeff? I'm guessing no. Wiki.
I don't actually. This is World War I is not my stronger suit.
Okay. Wait, let me make sure the Zimmerman telegram wasn't World War II. I don't think it was. I'm pretty sure it was World War I. Yeah, it happened in 1917. The British intercepted a telegram from Germany to Mexico that said, like, hey, if you get involved in World War I on our side, we will respect your claims over, like, taking Texas back, taking New Mexico back, and all that stuff. The problem with that as a reason to get involved is the fact that the Mexico was, like, in terrible shape at that point and really had no actual hope of getting an army together and go invading the U.S. Like, they would have certainly got their asses kicked. I think Germany was just kind of trying to be like, if you do that, then, like, I mean, you can see how Germany would benefit, right? Because that would prevent the U.S. Like, they probably saw the writing on the wall of the U.S. coming in, and so they basically wanted they wanted to keep the U.S. distracted because they knew that if Mexico actually did do that, the U.S. would devote all of its resources to, fighting back and probably take some parts of Mexico.
Yeah, something's just changed in Mexico. I mean, they're definitely in a place where they could do that now. you know.
I mean, compared to, they're certainly not a place where they can invade the United States and win, but I mean, like, definitely compared to the crisis they were in at that point, I mean, I would think they probably have their shit a lot more together today.
We'll leave that to the history books, folks.
So that's really, I mean, the Zimmerman telegram also not really a reason to get involved, just because, like, it was obvious to everyone that wasn't going to happen. But I mean, it was like kind of one of those things that like hit the headlines and got people thinking, oh, you know, maybe it makes sense to go ahead and to help out our British and French allies. But really, I think the main reason the U.S. got involved was money. And that's because they had during the period of 1914 and 1917, like they had sort of had like a neutral position, I guess, but they were lending a lot more money to the Allies. They were the other side, the Entente. Or wait, what was it called? Now I've forgotten what the other side is called. Wow, you can edit this part out. Okay. The Central
Bitches, the bitches who lost.
Yeah, the Central Powers.
Okay.
You don't have to edit that out, but yeah, for some reason I thought they were called something else. Yeah. So anyways, they had lent a lot of money to the Brits, and basically they thought that, like, okay, well, I mean, from 1914 to 1917, it was kind of like, well, if they win it for us, we don't have to get involved, and we're going to get our loans paid back. But then, like, 1917 rolls around, and there was a real possibility that Germany might actually win, especially as, like, the Eastern Front wrapped up. And so that the U.S. was like, oh, shit, we're not going to get our money back if they win. So the U.S. gets directly involved. And at the very beginning, the main thing that really actually did was a morale boost. Because, I mean, like I mentioned, the French had basically decided they weren't going to fight. They weren't going to go like on the offensive anymore. The UK was having a lot of losses too, or, you know, at least like stalling. And so the U.S. Getting involved at the very beginning was mostly about a morale boost. And then by the end, I mean, the U.S. never made up a majority of soldiers or anything like that by any means. I actually have the counts on some of the countries that lost troops because I find them very surprising, some of these facts. So let me get into that real quick. So Russia lost 7,500 soldiers. They had 7,500 killed in World War One, which is less than New Zealand.
Wow. Well, if the winter protects them. It really just depends on what kind of battling they were doing. I mean, the numbers were definitely higher in World War II.
Well, yeah, Russia lost a ton more people in World War II, and I think that part of what explains why they lost so little in World War One is that mostly it was like a dying royal family that was their government, and so like they were still basically feudal at the time when World War One started. So like it had a feudal style army, which didn't have that many people in it.
Okay.
So yeah, they lost less troops than New Zealand in World War One. And I only wrote down at least the casualty numbers, or sorry, the death numbers, not the total casualties, which includes like injuries and captured and all that stuff, just because I figured it was better to give a direct comparison that way. The U.S. lost 117,000 soldiers. The U.K. lost 700,000. And France lost 1.4 million.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to think about that time frame. Like, right. That really depletes the UK and France's population, right? A significant percentage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's one thing that, you know, led to perceived weakness in those countries in World War II. And also, like led to the fact that like nowadays we have a U.S. led order, at least for a little while. It seems like we will. I mean, like the Marshall Plan. I mean, we'll get into that kind of stuff like at the end of World War II. But I mean, effectively at the end of World War II, because of all these losses, like the U.S. was really in a position to seize power in Europe effectively.
Yeah, it's my favorite part about history.
You're a big Marshall Plan head. I know. I always knew that about you.
Yeah, I've got it above my bed. It's on my ceiling, and I look at it every night and do like a finger kiss, up at the ceiling.
That's amazing. So if you guys don't have anything else on this, I can jump into like final thoughts / like, well, not final thoughts, but after the war, like how it wraps up.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So one big thing that came out of World War I is that Woodrow Wilson forms the League of Nations, which is kind of like the beginning of the United Nations. It has the idea of a League of Nations is to prevent anything like World War I from ever happening again, because it was a terrible tragedy. I mean, for every country involved, really. One interesting thing about the League of Nations is that the United States never actually entered it.
Wait, so we made it, but we didn't enter it?
Well, Woodrow Wilson designed it, but I guess maybe like the UK pushed it at first. And the US, there was still enough domestic willpower from that side that said, like, well, we should have never gotten involved in the first place, right? Like, because in the 1900s, the U.S. was very like non-interventionist. There was a large political contingent of non-interventionists who really did not want to get involved in other nations. I mean, now they were still benefiting from the fact that the U.S. was like economically dominating South America, right? But they didn't want to like fight wars and such. And so
the Congress and Senate like actually had power to do things back then.
Yes, that's also
so.
Yes, Congress would have to confirm. So Wilson made up the League of Nations, and he was the president. And for the U.S. to join, Congress would have to actually confirm that, and they never did. They had enough people who didn't want it, who thought that it was basically going to be like a reason for the U.S. to be involved in another war. I mean, maybe you could think that if like in a world where the U.S. get involved in the League of Nations, like maybe they're strong enough to prevent World War II from happening, but it's probably not likely that would have happened anyways. Like there were a lot of problems in the League of Nations. I mean, even more than the UN, it was very dominated by the founding members who were like those Western European countries. Didn't really, unlike the UN, it didn't really have like the idea that they were going to include, other parts of the world, like, colonial powers and stuff, China and what have you. So yeah. Anyways, other things that happened out of World War I. Germany was required to disarm and pay massive reparations, which that's probably directly one of the causes of World War II. And also, like, I mean, Germany was having a lot of economic problems. That's like part of the reason that Hitler came to power in the first place. So in whether or not you can blame it on World War I and like the peace is another question, but like people at the time definitely thought that France was going too hard on Germany. Like the people from the UK and the US definitely felt like they shouldn't require them to pay that much of a reparations, and that they were effectively fighting another war by doing that. Like that was something that was said at the time. So, I mean, hindsight 2020, I guess. Another thing that happened at the end of World War I is that the Ottoman Empire collapsed. So the UK actually benefited from that a lot, since they were the world's foremost naval power at that time. They seized a bunch of colonies. They seized some from Germany, but they also seized a lot of stuff that was part of the Ottoman Empire. Because once the Ottoman Empire collapsed, it just became Turkey, and they used to rule like all the way down to Egypt. So they ruled a lot of what we consider the modern like Middle East.
Nuts to know that the Ottoman Empire lasted that long. Like that's nuts that it was around at the same time that World War One was going on.
Yeah,
Like, what's from a history's perspective, like that's bonkers to me that they were still around.
1400, right? I mean, like, these.
Yeah, it's forever ago.
Right. Yep. And so one notable colony that the UK got from the Ottomans at the end of World War One is a little place called Palestine.
Yep.
So the UK was ruling that directly at that time. At least between World War One and World War Two, that's what was happening there.
Interesting.
Another thing that happened out of World War One is that Austria had to agree that it could not merge with Germany without the consent of the League of Nations. So that was kind of one of the things that Hitler did that people considered to be aggressive in World War II, is that he annexed Austria without getting the consent of the League of Nations.
Yeah, and Austria wasn't, from what I remember, Austria wasn't thrilled about that. But they really didn't have a choice in the matter. So,
well, we talked about this on the last World War One episode, but like prior to World War One, Austria-Hungary was like a huge power, and they kind of collapsed during World War One, just like the Ottomans did. And so the fact that they couldn't merge with Germany, like prior to World War One, that would have just been a given. Like they didn't want to. But like after World War One, when it was just Austria, like at that point, they kind of had no reason not to, in a way, right? Because they're feeling like they're German people. And I guess when I say Austria couldn't merge with Germany, I guess at that point there was a German, like it was the German Empire, I think is what fought in World War One. So it was called Germany. Another thing that happened is that Germany had to cede Alsace-Lorraine to France, which is another cause of World War II, is that they wanted it back again. They lost it in the France lost it in the Franco-Prussian War, and then Germany lost it in World War One, and then Germany won it back again in World War II. I would assume France still has it today, but I haven't looked into that. Germany also had to recognize Poland, which was a big deal because it's effectively before World War One. Poland didn't exist as a country, and the territory was like split between mostly Germany and Russia. So the fact that Germany had to recognize Poland basically meant that they lost a whole lot of territory. I mean, there were Polish people there, so it wasn't like it was German territory, but it was still like directly administered by them and stuff, right? So they had to recognize Poland, which means Poland became independent, and therefore all that territory that was administered by them was not administered by them anymore.
oh, Poland, it's your birthday.
Poland, I think, is one of the most cursed nations as far as history is concerned. So anything good that happens to them, I feel like you can kind of definitely celebrate for.
Yeah.
So also Germany had to cede a little bit of territory to Denmark, their northernmost tip. That went to Denmark and is still part of Denmark today. And they also had to cede a little territory to Belgium. I don't know if that's still part of Belgium. I would imagine so. They also had to kind of release this weird little republic called the Saar Valley. That was where the majority of German like steel was happening. They had a lot of coal there, and they made a lot of steel, and so it was a big industrial center for them. And effectively, this territory was administered directly by the League of Nations, which is really strange. It was something I didn't know going into this research, is that happened. But they had their own flag and everything. Like there was a flag for the Republic of the Saar Valley, which I had never heard of before.
I mean, that sounds like
Where was that
something.
located exactly? So that's in Western Germany, and it's directly next to Alsace-Lorraine. So I think part of the idea was that they were going to kind of like make like a buffer state almost, but in the end, it really ended up pissing Germany off a lot, and also it kind of like made it really hard for them to pay their war indemnities back because of the fact that this territory was directly administered by the League of Nations and not, under German control.
Gotcha.
One of their big industrial centers. The other thing that happened, I mentioned this before, is that Japan got a lot of German colonies in Asia. Japan was on the side of the Allies mostly because they thought that Germany was going to lose and they wanted to take a bunch of colonies.
That worked out.
All right. This is still feudal Japan, so that sounds about right.
Well, I think at that point it's the Japanese Empire, which I would consider a different period than feudal Japan. I mean,
Sure, yeah.
They were ruled. They still had an emperor, and I think they still have an emperor. But now they're a constitutional monarchy. I mean, the feudal Japan period is what I would consider like to be when they were entirely inward looking. And at some point they switched to being like an actual empire. And it's just
So pre-Edo. Edo period is when they started trading and getting guns and stuff.
yeah. I mean, at some point, the United States sent a warship there to like get them to open their ports. And I mean, at that point, I think it's kind of like game over. They realized that if people could do that to them, they needed to be able to do that to other people. So that's the end of my notes. We've reached the end. We reached the end of the war. We have, I think, done all of the setup to talk about. I mean, we've already brushed on it, right? But to talk about what happened in World War II and why it happened, what was going on in Europe that made that, I guess, a necessity.
Yeah. This is a good framework so that you can understand the mass political turmoil that was going on at the time. Like everything was kind of a mess right here. And I mean, you could say it still is to this day, but it's definitely a mess right now.
I think the biggest thing I learned from this episode, not the biggest thing, but probably the thing I'll take away the most is the scale of World War I compared to World War II. Like, I just always assumed that World War I was like much bigger than as far as number of people involved than what you've said. And just knowing how many people like died in that war versus just the people that were killed in like the camps and stuff in World War II. Sure. Like the scale is just so much grander for.
This was American Silent Generation, right?
Yeah. I would say so.
I want to cut you off, Jeff. I just wanted to verify that.
And one thing that Jeff said that made me think of something that I forgot to include, the concentration camp, I believe, was invented by the UK as part of the Boer War. I meant to include that in my notes.
Interesting. So we know who to blame.
There's all this stuff that I should be surprised about that I wind up not being surprised about, because I just think of like how they treated Ireland and Scotland.
Right.
Like it just doesn't surprise me now. Like I wouldn't have thought it, But now that that's a thing, I'm definitely not surprised by it.
Yeah, and the tactic of using like, intentional deprivation of resources and calling it a famine. Like, we kind of have.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's been around since the Roman times, but like, or earlier. But I mean, like using that as a way to do international diplomacy in the way we think of it, I feel like we have the Brits to blame for that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's fair. That's a complete fair assessment.
Man, white people are the worst.
Really.
Yeah.
And
white people are
camps, I mean, you got to really say that's a pretty reprehensible sin.
Yeah.
White people killing white people. I do want to say that. That is white people killing white people.
Yeah, I guess that's true. We usually do like worse things to people who look different from us.
Yeah, but I mean, World War One was famous for chemical warfare, right? Gas bombs and
right. And one thing about that is that the Germans kind of had like a gentleman's agreement to not use those on the French and British, but they felt obligated to still use them on Russian soldiers and treated them as kind of like lesser, which preview of other things to come.
Yeah, get used to those tactics.
I think we're in one. Let's see. Yeah, the Geneva Convention came out of World War One, didn't it? That's kind of Wait, no.
Yeah.
The Geneva Convention came out of World War II. It started in World War One, but it wasn't called the Geneva Convention until the end of World War II. So, like, they basically took treaties that they got after World War One and extended them based on some things.
Yeah, there's 4 treaties and 3 additional protocols. The singular term Geneva Convention denotes the agreements of 1949, which is post World War II.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up on how we've, at least for 50 years, managed to prevent war crimes.
Yeah, say it again, Jeff.
Say what again?
White people are terrible.
Oh, they are. They're just awful.
Yeah, so bad, so bad. And you'd think we'd. The thing is, we learned from it, but we learned the wrong thing, right? Like, we learned that shit works instead of maybe we shouldn't do that shit.
Yeah, I'd say that's largely true. The thing they learned in World War One was like how to fight World War II.
Yeah, it's like pre-war. It's like a pregame warm-up.
Basically, yeah.
All right, so next time we'll get into World War II and like what about World War II we'll be covering next?
I don't know. I haven't really thought that far ahead. And when Jeff says next time, he does not mean next episode. We certainly won't be doing it next episode.
Right. Yeah, we're scattering these in.
Yeah, but next time, I want to talk about. I feel like I've talked enough about the causes of World War II. I feel like it may make sense to just kind of go back to almost the drawing board, because what made me realize that we needed to do these episodes was my first attempt. We've actually done 3 episodes on World War II now, but one wasn't really part of this series. It was kind of like a primer on, like we was us trying to grasp at what happened in World War II. And I feel like we were just having so much trouble that we needed to go back and put it in historical context.
Glad we did. I learned a lot today.
Yeah, I thought it was nice. And I definitely learned some of many things doing the research. So that's always nice too.
That's when we do stuff like this.
Exactly. To teach Jeff something new.
Yeah, it was like expand Jeff's thoughts.
Yeah, that should actually be the new name of the podcast. Jeff's Thoughts Expanded.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but Jeff's in parentheses before it.
Jeff's. And it can apply to any Jeff. You can just share a podcast with any Jeff who needs his thoughts expanded. And
There's a lot of us out there. It's like those Coke cans that say share with XYZ. You could share this podcast with all the Jeffs in your family. Please do.
these are the Jeffs I know.
All right. See everybody next time. Thanks for tuning in. This has been the Panda Pod Thoughts Expanded, and we will catch you in Discord. Please join our Discord so you can tell us, I'm so bored of World War I episodes. Stop doing history or other thoughts. See everybody.
Later.
Ever felt like you're wandering through a world that doesn't quite fit? Like you're a square peg being nudged into a round hole? Maybe you've caught yourself gazing up at the stars, pondering the mysteries that seem to slip through the fingers of conventional wisdom. Do esoteric beliefs resonate with you more than everyday chatter? Is there a voice inside you whispering that there's infinitely more to this universe than what meets our 3D eyes? If any of this sounds familiar, if any of these questions stir something deep within you, then you might just be the alien we're looking for. This isn't about being from another planet. It's about feeling like you're out of place in this one. It's about believing in the extraordinary, the spaces between. So tell us, do you feel that call, that pull towards something, somewhere that defies the ordinary? If so, welcome. Your mothership, Hot Alien Summer Camp, is calling you home. Are you ready to answer that call? To step into a space where your unique beliefs aren't just accepted but celebrated? Imagine a place where the extraordinary is the norm and the mysteries of the cosmos are the evening's main topic of discussion. A retreat where every workshop, every activity, and every shared meal is an opportunity to explore what lies beyond our conventional 3D experience. Did you find yourself nodding along just then? Feeling that spark of excitement at the thought of connecting with others who share your curiosity for the unknown? Then it's no coincidence you're hearing this right now. This is your invitation to join us, to become a part of a community that doesn't just ask the big questions, but revels in them. And what's a gathering of aliens without a little interstellar entertainment? Prepare to laugh with beings who understand your humor, as we bring you live comedy from cosmic minds of Ryan Singer and paranormal Karen Rontowski. Their insights and wit are as boundless as the universe, promising an experience that's as enlightening as it is hilarious. So, if you're ready to leave behind the world of round holes for a place where every square peg finds its place, a Hot Alien Summer Camp awaits. From August 8th through 11th in Lebanon, Tennessee, we're not just creating a retreat, we're forming a constellation of like-minded souls, each shining their unique light. Are you one of us? Are you ready to explore the depths of your alien soul among friends who understand that it's time to beat 'em up to Hot Alien Summer Camp? Your space in the cosmos is reserved. All you need to do is claim it. Visit hotaliensummercamp.com. Pre-sale tickets are on sale now. Let's embark on this cosmic journey together.